The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Bragg shooting range as Sarah Mitchell adjusted the scope on her rifle for the third time. Something felt off today, though she couldn't pinpoint what. The familiar weight of the weapon, the crisp North Carolina air, even the distant sound of helicopters conducting training exercises. Everything seemed normal. Yet an inexplicable tension hung in the air like morning mist. Sarah had been working as a civilian marksmanship instructor at the base for 2 years now, and she prided herself on reading the subtle signs that most people missed. Today felt different. Maybe it was the way the range master had avoided eye contact during the morning briefing, or how the usual chatter among the soldiers seemed more subdued than normal. She pushed the thoughts aside and focused on the task at hand. A new group of special operations candidates would arrive within the hour for their advanced marksmanship assessment. These weren't your typical soldiers. They were the elite, the ones who had already proven themselves through grueling selection processes. Today's exercise would determine who had the precision and mental fortitude to advance to the next phase of training. Sarah walked down the firing line, checking each shooting position. The targets she'd set up yesterday had been standard, black bullseyes on white backgrounds at various distances from 300 to 800 meters. But this morning, she'd received new orders. The assessment would be more challenging than usual. She pulled out her tablet and reviewed the specifications. The new targets were smaller, irregularly shaped, and would be positioned at unconventional angles. Some would be partially concealed behind barriers, others would be elevated or placed in shadowed areas that would test the shooter's ability to adapt to real-world conditions. As she began setting up the first target, Sarah reflected on how she'd ended up in this position. 5 years ago, she'd been a competitive shooter on the civilian circuit, winning state and national championships with a consistency that had caught the attention of military recruiters. But instead of enlisting, she'd chosen to serve as a contractor, believing she could make a greater impact by training others, rather than serving in combat herself. The decision hadn't been popular with her family, especially her father, a Marine veteran who believed that if you were going to serve your country, you should do it in uniform. But Sarah had always been stubborn, a trait that had served her well in competitive shooting, but sometimes created friction in her personal relationships. She climbed the small hill behind the 600-meter line, carrying the first target and its mounting hardware. The morning was heating up, and she could feel sweat beginning to form on her forehead despite the early hour. The target weighed about 15 pounds and was awkward to carry, but Sarah had learned to manage the physical demands of her job with the same precision she applied to everything else. As she secured the target to its mount, she heard the rumble of vehicles approaching the range. Through the trees, she could see a convoy of military trucks and SUVs making their way down the access road. Her new students were arriving early, another sign that today was going to be different from the routine assessments she'd grown accustomed to. Sarah finished securing the target and headed back toward the firing line. She still had 4 more targets to position before the group arrived, and she prided herself on being ready when her students showed up. Preparation was everything in marksmanship, and she insisted on modeling the behavior she expected from others. The second target went up at 450 meters, positioned behind a partial barrier that would require the shooters to find a narrow window of opportunity. Sarah had designed this particular challenge based on scenarios she'd studied from actual combat situations. In the field, enemy combatants rarely presented themselves as perfect bullseye targets. They hid behind walls, vehicles, and natural obstacles, requiring precision shooters to make split-second calculations about angles, wind, and timing. As she worked, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with her supervisor the previous evening. Colonel Williams had been unusually cryptic about today's assessment, mentioning that there would be special observers present and that the results would be particularly important for future assignments. When Sarah had pressed for details, The colonel had simply said that some of the candidates being tested today were being considered for highly classified positions that required exceptional marksmanship skills. The assessment would be more than just a test of accuracy. It would evaluate how the candidates performed under pressure, adapted to unexpected challenges, and maintained precision when faced with scenarios that pushed their limits. The third target required Sarah to climb even higher up the hillside to a position that offered a clear view of the entire range. As she worked to secure the mounting system, she could hear the vehicles getting closer. Voices carried on the morning air, low, serious conversations that spoke to the gravity of whatever mission these soldiers were preparing for. Sarah had always been curious about the bigger picture surrounding her work. She trained shooters, but she rarely learned what they did with the skills she helped them develop. Sometimes she would see familiar faces in news reports or hear fragments of stories about successful operations, and she would wonder if the soldiers she'd trained had played a role in those missions. The fourth target was the most challenging to position. It required her to rappel down a short cliff face to reach a ledge that would place the target in an extremely difficult shooting position. The target would be visible only from certain angles and would require the shooters to demonstrate not just accuracy, but tactical thinking and problem-solving skills. As Sarah rappelled down the cliff, she heard the first vehicle doors slamming shut. Her students had arrived, and she could hear the range master beginning his preliminary briefings. She worked quickly but carefully, knowing that any mistake in target placement could compromise the entire assessment. From her position on the ledge, Sarah had a clear view of the parking area. What she saw surprised her. Instead of the typical group of 20 to 30 candidates, there appeared to be only about a dozen soldiers. But these weren't ordinary soldiers. Even from a distance, she could tell these men carried themselves differently. Their movements were economical, purposeful, and they seemed to scan their environment constantly, as if assessing threats and opportunities with every step. Sarah finished securing the fourth target and began her climb back up the cliff face. The fifth and final target would be positioned at 800 meters, the maximum distance for today's assessment. This target would separate the good shooters from the exceptional ones. At that distance, factors like wind speed, atmospheric pressure, and even the Earth's rotation would affect bullet trajectory. As she made her way to the 800-meter position, Sarah could hear the range master conducting equipment inspections. The soldiers were checking their rifles, adjusting scopes, and going through the meticulous pre-shooting rituals that every precision marksman developed over years of training. The final target required the most careful positioning. Sarah used a laser rangefinder to ensure the exact distance, then checked and double-checked the mounting system. This target would likely determine which candidates advanced to whatever came next in their training pipeline. As she worked, Sarah became aware that someone was watching her. She turned and saw a figure standing about 50 meters away, observing her work with obvious interest. The man was wearing standard military fatigues, but something about his bearing suggested he was no ordinary soldier. He was tall, lean, and moved with the controlled grace of someone whose body was a finely tuned instrument. The man approached slowly, his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. As he got closer, Sarah could see more details. He was probably in his early 30s, with short brown hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Most notably, he carried himself with the quiet confidence that Sarah had learned to associate with truly elite operators. "Ma'am," he said as he reached speaking distance. His voice was calm and respectful, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was used to being taken seriously. "I'm Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez. I understand you're the instructor for today's assessment." Sarah nodded, finishing the final adjustments to the target mount. "That's right, Sarah Mitchell." "You're early. We don't start for another 20 minutes. Rodriguez smiled slightly. "Habit of mine. I like to understand the environment before I'm expected to perform in it. He gestured toward the target Sarah was positioning. That's a challenging setup you've created. It's supposed to be, Sarah replied, stepping back to check her work one final time. The candidates we're testing today are supposedly among the best. The assessment needs to match their skill level. Mind if I ask what your background is? Rodriguez asked. It's not often we see civilian instructors who understand tactical shooting scenarios this well. Sarah packed up her tools as she answered. Competitive shooting for about 10 years before I came here. State and national championships in long-range precision events. But I've studied military applications extensively. I believe in training people for real-world scenarios, not just perfect range conditions. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need more of. He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. Would you mind if I observed your instruction today? I'm always interested in learning new approaches to training. There was something in his manner that suggested this was more than casual curiosity, but Sarah couldn't put her finger on what. You'll have to clear it with Colonel Williams, but I don't have any objection. As they walked back toward the firing line together, Rodriguez asked about Sarah's philosophy on marksmanship training. She found herself explaining her belief that shooting was as much a mental discipline as a physical skill, and that the best marksmen were those who could maintain focus and precision under pressure. Most people think it's about having steady hands and good eyesight, Sarah said as they approached the group of assembled soldiers. But those are just the baseline requirements. Real precision shooting is about controlling your breathing, managing stress, reading environmental conditions, and making calculations under time pressure. It's about performing perfectly when the stakes are high and failure means people die. Rodriguez listened intently, asking occasional questions that demonstrated a deep understanding of advanced marksmanship principles. Sarah found herself impressed by his knowledge and began to suspect that he was more than just another candidate taking the assessment. Colonel Williams appeared as they reached the firing line, and Sarah introduced Rodriguez as one of the candidates who had arrived early. The colonel's reaction was interesting. There was a subtle change in his posture, a slight deference that suggested Rodriguez held a position of some importance. "Petty Officer Rodriguez," the colonel said, extending his hand. "We're honored to have you here today. I trust everything meets with your approval." The exchange confirmed Sarah's suspicion that Rodriguez wasn't just another candidate. The colonel's deferential tone suggested that Rodriguez was here in some kind of evaluative capacity, perhaps to assess the training program itself rather than to be assessed. As the rest of the candidates gathered around the firing line, Sarah began her standard briefing. She explained the targets, the distances, and the scoring system. But as she spoke, she found herself paying particular attention to Rodriguez's reactions to her words. He listened with the focused attention of someone who was evaluating not just what she was saying, but how she was saying it. The other candidates were an impressive group, all clearly experienced soldiers with the kind of physical conditioning and mental alertness that came from years of specialized training. But Rodriguez stood apart from them in subtle ways. While the others focused intently on Sarah's briefing, Rodriguez seemed to be absorbing everything around him: the wind conditions, the lighting, the terrain, and even the behavior of the other candidates. Sarah finished her briefing and directed the candidates to select their firing positions. Standard protocol called for her to observe from a position behind the firing line, taking notes on each candidate's performance and providing feedback as needed. But as the candidates began setting up their equipment, Rodriguez approached her again. "Ms. Mitchell," he said quietly, "would you mind if I asked you to demonstrate the 800-meter shot before we begin? I'd like the other candidates to see your technique." The request surprised Sarah. She rarely demonstrated during assessments, preferring to let the candidates show their skills without the pressure of having to match an instructor's performance. But there was something in Rodriguez's manner that suggested this wasn't really a request. I suppose that would be acceptable, Sarah replied, though she felt a flutter of nervousness. Performing in front of elite soldiers was different from competing in civilian matches, and she was suddenly aware that her reputation as an instructor might depend on how well she shot today. Rodriguez smiled. Excellent. I think it will be very educational for everyone. As Sarah prepared for the demonstration shot, she became aware that all conversation had stopped. The candidates were watching her with obvious interest, and she could feel the weight of their expectations. This was no longer just about assessing their skills. Somehow, she had become the one being evaluated. She approached the firing line with her rifle, a precision weapon that she had customized over years of competition and instruction. The familiar weight of the gun was comforting, and she forced herself to focus on the fundamentals that had served her well for over a decade. The 800-meter target was barely visible through her scope, appearing as a small, dark shape against the hillside. Sarah checked the wind flags positioned at various points down the range, calculated the atmospheric conditions, and made the minute adjustments to her scope that would compensate for the long-distance shot. As she settled into her shooting position, Sarah became aware that Rodriguez had moved to a position where he could observe her technique closely. She could feel his eyes on her as she controlled her breathing and found her natural point of aim. The shot, when it came, surprised even Sarah with its perfection. Through her scope, she could see that the bullet had struck the exact center of the target, a feat that would have been impressive at any distance, but was particularly noteworthy at 800 meters. The candidates erupted in spontaneous applause, and Sarah felt a flush of pride mixed with relief. She had proven herself in front of some of the military's finest marksmen, and the demonstration had gone better than she could have hoped. But as she safed her rifle and stood up from the firing position, Sarah noticed that Rodriguez wasn't applauding. Instead, he was studying her with an expression of intense interest, as if he had just seen something that confirmed a theory he'd been developing. "Outstanding shot," Rodriguez said as the applause died down. "But I have to ask, would you mind taking one more shot? At the 600-meter target this time, but with a twist." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "What kind of twist?" Rodriguez pointed to the 600-meter target, which was positioned behind a partial barrier. "That target simulates an enemy combatant who's using cover. In a real-world scenario, you'd need to take that shot quickly, before the target moves to better cover. Would you be willing to demonstrate a rapid engagement?" The request was unusual, but Sarah nodded. Rapid engagement was a skill she had developed through years of competitive shooting, though she rarely had occasion to demonstrate it in her role as an instructor. She moved to a different firing position that offered the best angle on the partially concealed target. This shot would require not just accuracy, but speed and the ability to find the target quickly through her scope. Rodriguez positioned himself where he could time the engagement. "Whenever you're ready," he said, "I'll call target and start timing. You'll have 10 seconds to acquire, aim, and fire." Sarah settled into position. Her rifle pointed in the general direction of the target, but not yet aimed. She controlled her breathing and waited for Rodriguez's command. "Target!" Sarah's movements were fluid and automatic, the result of thousands of hours of practice. She acquired the target through her scope, made the rapid calculations necessary for the shot, and fired in just under 6 seconds. Again, the shot was perfect, striking the visible portion of the target with precision that drew another round of applause from the watching candidates. But Rodriguez's reaction was what caught Sarah's attention. Instead of simply acknowledging the good shot, he walked over to where she was positioned and extended his hand toward her rifle. "Ms. Mitchell," he said quietly, "would you mind if I borrowed this for a moment?" Sarah looked at him in confusion. "I'm sorry?" Rodriguez's expression was serious, but not unfriendly. "I'd like to try that shot myself if you don't mind, but I'd like to use your rifle. I'm curious about how it performs." The request was highly unusual. Military protocols generally prohibited sharing weapons, especially precision rifles that were typically calibrated for specific users. But there was something in Rodriguez's manner that suggested he had the authority to make such requests. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then handed over her rifle. Rodriguez accepted it with the careful respect that all serious marksmen showed for quality equipment. He examined the weapon briefly, checking the scope settings and familiarizing himself with the controls. Then, without any apparent preparation, he moved to the firing position and aimed at the same 600-meter target Sarah had just hit. His movements were economical and precise, and Sarah could tell that he was an exceptionally skilled marksman just from the way he handled the rifle. Rodriguez fired a single shot, and through her binoculars, Sarah could see that his bullet had struck within inches of her own. It was an impressive demonstration of skill, made more remarkable by the fact that he had achieved such accuracy with an unfamiliar rifle. As Rodriguez safed the weapon and stood up, Sarah expected him to hand it back to her. Instead, he held on to the rifle and looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Ms. Mitchell," he said quietly, "I think we need to have a conversation." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as Rodriguez continued to hold her rifle. The other candidates were beginning to set up for their own assessments, but she could sense that something significant was happening beyond the normal training routine. "What kind of conversation?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. Rodriguez glanced around at the activity on the range, then looked back at her. "Not here. Too many ears. Could you meet me at the base commissary after the assessment is finished? Say 1400 hours? The formal military time reference struck Sarah as deliberate. Rodriguez was shifting into a more official mode, and she sensed that whatever he wanted to discuss had implications beyond casual conversation. "I suppose so," she replied, "but I'd like my rifle back first." Rodriguez smiled and handed over the weapon. "Of course. And Ms. Mitchell? What we discuss this afternoon needs to stay between us, at least initially. Are you comfortable with that?" Sarah nodded, though she felt increasingly curious about what Rodriguez might want from her. She secured her rifle and moved back to her observation position as the candidates began their assessments. For the next 3 hours, Sarah watched some of the finest marksmanship she had ever seen. The candidates were clearly exceptional soldiers, and their performance on the range confirmed that they belonged to an elite group. Several managed to hit the 800-meter target consistently, and most demonstrated the kind of rapid engagement skills that spoke to extensive combat experience. But throughout the assessment, Sarah found herself watching Rodriguez as much as the other candidates. When his turn came to shoot, he was methodical and precise, hitting every target with an accuracy that was impressive even by the standards of the group. More importantly, he demonstrated the kind of mental composure that separated good marksmen from great ones. During one particularly challenging rapid-fire sequence, a helicopter flew low over the range, creating significant noise and downdraft that affected the shooting conditions. While several candidates struggled to maintain their focus, Rodriguez seemed unaffected by the distraction, continuing to place his shots with mechanical precision. Sarah made notes on each candidate's performance, but she found herself paying particular attention to Rodriguez's techniques. There were subtle aspects of his shooting style that spoke to training beyond what most soldiers received. His breathing control was exceptional. His trigger discipline was textbook perfect, and his ability to read wind conditions suggested extensive experience with long-range shooting in varied environments. When the assessment concluded, Colonel Williams approached Sarah for her preliminary evaluation. She provided her standard professional assessment, noting the exceptional skill level of the group and highlighting several candidates who had demonstrated particularly impressive abilities. "And what about Petty Officer Rodriguez?" the colonel asked. Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "He's clearly highly skilled. His performance was consistently excellent, and he demonstrated exceptional composure under varying conditions. The colonel nodded, but Sarah detected something in his expression that suggested he had expected this response. "He's asked to speak with you privately this afternoon. I trust you'll give him your full attention." The phrasing struck Sarah as more instruction than request. "Of course, sir." As the candidates packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, Rodriguez approached Sarah one final time. "I'll see you at 1400, he said quietly. "And Ms. Mitchell, thank you for an excellent assessment. It was very educational." After the range cleared, Sarah spent time cleaning up and securing the targets. The work gave her time to think about the morning's events and Rodriguez's unusual behavior. Clearly, he was more than just another candidate, and his interest in her seemed to extend beyond professional courtesy. At precisely 1400 hours, Sarah arrived at the base commissary to find Rodriguez already there, seated at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He stood as she approached, another small gesture that spoke to military courtesy and attention to detail. "Thank you for coming," Rodriguez said as they both sat down. "I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of getting you coffee. I wasn't sure how you prefer it, so I kept it black." Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. The afternoon was warm, but the air conditioning in the commissary was set high enough that the hot beverage was welcome. "So," she said, "what did you want to discuss?" Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same intense attention she had noticed on the range. "First, let me be completely honest about who I am and why I'm here. I'm not just another candidate taking an assessment." Sarah nodded. "I figured that out when Colonel Williams treated you like visiting royalty." "I'm a member of SEAL Team 6, Rodriguez continued, "and I'm here as part of a talent identification program. We're looking for individuals with very specific skill sets for some upcoming operations." The revelation didn't entirely surprise Sarah, but hearing it confirmed added weight to the conversation. SEAL Team 6 was among the most elite units in the military, and their operations rarely made the news unless something went very wrong or very right. "What does that have to do with me?" Sarah asked. "I'm a civilian contractor. I train soldiers, but I'm not a soldier myself." Rodriguez smiled. "That's exactly why we're interested in you. Sometimes our operations require capabilities that can't be provided by traditional military personnel. Your background in competitive shooting combined with your instructional experience gives you a unique skill set." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "What kind of operations?" "I can't get into specifics yet," Rodriguez replied, "but I can tell you that we're facing some challenges that require precision marksmanship in environments where traditional military operators might be conspicuous." The implication was clear. There were missions that required someone who could blend in as a civilian while possessing military-level shooting skills. Sarah began to understand why Rodriguez had been so interested in evaluating her performance. "Are you offering me a job?" she asked directly. "I'm offering you the opportunity to be considered for specialized training that could lead to occasional contract work with my unit. The pay would be significantly better than your current position, and the work would be meaningful." Sarah sipped her coffee, using the time to consider the implications of what Rodriguez was suggesting. The idea of working with an elite special operations unit was undeniably appealing, but she was also aware of the risks involved. "What would the training involve?" she asked. "Advanced marksmanship in unconventional environments, urban shooting scenarios, stress inoculation, some basic tactical training. The goal would be to enhance your existing skills while developing new capabilities that we might need." Rodriguez paused, then continued. "There would also be psychological evaluations, security clearance processes, and other administrative requirements. This isn't something we offer lightly, and it's not something you should accept without careful consideration." Sarah appreciated his honesty about the seriousness of what he was proposing. "How much time do I have to decide?" 2 weeks. If you're interested, I'll arrange for you to visit our facility and see what the training would involve. No commitment required, just an opportunity to get a better understanding of what we're asking. The offer was tempting, but Sarah had learned to be cautious about major life decisions. Can I ask why you approached me? There must be other civilian marksmen with similar qualifications. Rodriguez nodded. There are, but very few with your combination of skills and experience. More importantly, very few with your ability to perform under pressure while maintaining the kind of precision we require. He leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. This morning's assessment wasn't just about evaluating candidates for regular special operations training. I was specifically looking for someone with your capabilities. Your performance confirmed what we had hoped. Sarah realized that the entire morning had been an elaborate recruitment effort, with her as the primary target. The thought was both flattering and slightly unsettling. Were the other candidates real? She asked. Absolutely. They're all legitimate special operations personnel, and the assessment was real. But we used the exercise as an opportunity to evaluate you in a natural setting, working with people at the highest skill levels. Rodriguez reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. This has my contact information. If you decide you're interested in learning more, call me, and I'll arrange the facility visit. Sarah accepted the card, noting that it bore only Rodriguez's name and a phone number. No unit designation, no official titles, just the minimal information necessary for her to reach him. What happens if I decide this isn't for me? She asked. Then we part company as professionals, and you continue in your current role with our appreciation for your time and consideration. No pressure, no consequences. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Rodriguez providing general information about the selection and training process without revealing operational details. Sarah found herself impressed by his professionalism and the thoughtful way he presented the opportunity. As they prepared to leave, Rodriguez made one final point. Ms. Mitchell, I want you to understand that this conversation represents a significant level of trust from my organization. The fact that we're even having this discussion means we believe you have exceptional potential. Sarah nodded, understanding the weight of what he was saying. I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me. I'll give this serious consideration. They shook hands, and Rodriguez left first, walking with the controlled purpose that Sarah had noticed earlier. She remained at the table for a few more minutes, processing the afternoon's revelations and trying to imagine what her life might look like if she accepted the offer. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about Rodriguez's proposal. She researched what little publicly available information existed about SEAL Team 6 operations, trying to understand the kinds of missions that might require her skills. The more she learned, the more intrigued she became. Sarah also spent time honestly evaluating her current situation. While she enjoyed her work as a marksmanship instructor, she had to admit that the routine had become somewhat predictable. The opportunity to use her skills in more challenging and meaningful ways was appealing. A week after her conversation with Rodriguez, Sarah made her decision. She called the number on his card and left a message expressing interest in the facility visit. Rodriguez returned her call within 2 hours, and they arranged for her to visit the SEAL Team 6 compound the following week. The facility visit was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The compound was obviously designed for the highest levels of training, with shooting ranges that simulated urban environments, aircraft mock-ups for hostage rescue scenarios, and sophisticated equipment that went far beyond anything she had seen at Fort Bragg. Rodriguez personally conducted the tour, introducing her to other team members and demonstrating some of the training exercises she would undergo if accepted into the program. Sarah was particularly impressed by a shooting house that could be reconfigured to simulate different environments and scenarios. This is where we practice close-quarters marksmanship, Rodriguez explained as they watched a training exercise. The scenarios change constantly, and the pressure is designed to simulate real-world conditions. Sarah observed several operators working through the shooting house, noting the speed and precision with which they engaged targets while navigating complex environments. The level of skill was extraordinary, but she found herself analyzing their techniques and considering how her own background might contribute to their capabilities. During a break in the tour, Rodriguez introduced Sarah to the team's commanding officer, a soft-spoken man named Captain Morrison, who seemed to embody the quiet professionalism that characterized the entire unit. "Ms. Mitchell," Captain Morrison said, "Petty Officer Rodriguez speaks very highly of your capabilities. We're looking forward to seeing what you might bring to our team." The conversation was brief but significant. Captain Morrison asked thoughtful questions about Sarah's background and motivations, and she found herself speaking candidly about her desire to use her skills in more meaningful ways. At the end of the visit, Rodriguez walked Sarah to her car. "What are your thoughts?" he asked. Sarah looked back at the compound, considering everything she had seen. "I'm impressed, and I'm interested, but I still have questions about what would be expected of me." "That's exactly the response we hoped for," Rodriguez replied. "Someone who asks good questions and thinks carefully about commitments is exactly the kind of person we need." He handed her a folder containing information about the selection process and training timeline. "Take your time reviewing this. If you decide to proceed, we'll start with a 2-week evaluation period that will give both you and us a chance to determine if this is the right fit." As Sarah drove away from the compound, she realized that she had already made her decision. The opportunity to work with such an elite group, using her skills in ways that could make a real difference, was exactly what she had been looking for without knowing it. 3 days later, Sarah submitted her resignation as a marksmanship instructor at Fort Bragg and formally accepted Rodriguez's offer to begin the SEAL Team 6 evaluation process. The next phase of her life was about to begin, and she had no idea where it would lead. 6 months later, Sarah found herself crouched behind a concrete barrier in an abandoned warehouse district outside of Norfolk, Virginia. The morning fog hung heavy in the air, and she could barely make out the outline of the building that served as the target for today's final evaluation exercise. The past 6 months had been the most challenging and rewarding of her life. The SEAL Team 6 training program had pushed her far beyond anything she had experienced as a civilian marksman. She had learned urban combat techniques, advanced ballistics calculations, stress management under extreme conditions, and dozens of other skills that transformed her from an excellent competitive shooter into something approaching a tactical operator. Today's exercise would determine whether she would be accepted as a contract asset for the team. The scenario was complex. A simulated hostage situation in a multi-story building with friendly forces, hostages, and hostile targets distributed throughout the structure. Sarah's role was to provide precision overwatch support from a concealed position 400 meters away. Rodriguez, who had become her primary mentor during the training process, was positioned nearby with his own rifle. The exercise called for 2 snipers working in coordination, with Rodriguez serving as the primary shooter and Sarah providing backup support and reconnaissance. "Comms check," Rodriguez whispered into his radio. Sarah touched her earpiece and heard the response from the command post. "Lima 1, Lima 2, this is Control. Radio check complete. Mission is go in T-2 minutes." Through her scope, Sarah could see movement in the target building. The exercise used live role players acting as hostages and hostiles, with electronic sensors that would register hits from the special training ammunition they were using. The realism was extraordinary, and Sarah felt the familiar pre-engagement tension that she had learned to channel into improved focus. "Target building has 3 confirmed hostiles visible," Rodriguez reported quietly. 2 on the 2nd floor, 1 on the 3rd. No clear shots on the 2nd floor targets due to window angles. Sarah adjusted her scope and scanned the building systematically. Through her more powerful optic, she could see details that Rodriguez was missing from his position. Lima 2 has eyes on a fourth hostile, she reported. Third floor, northeast corner. Appears to be in overwatch position with a rifle. Good eye, Rodriguez responded. That one's yours if we get the green light. The command voice crackled in their earpieces. Lima 1, Lima 2, you are cleared to engage. Repeat, cleared to engage. Priority target is the third floor sniper position. Sarah felt her heartbeat slow as she entered the focused state that had served her well in countless competitions. But this was different from any competition she had ever experienced. The stakes felt real, even though she knew it was a training exercise. She found the hostile sniper in her scope and began the mental calculations that had become second nature. Distance, wind speed, atmospheric conditions, target movement patterns, all the variables that determined whether a shot would hit or miss. Taking the shot, she whispered, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure that she had perfected over years of practice. The training round hit the sensor with a satisfying electronic beep that confirmed the hit. Through her scope, Sarah could see the role player react appropriately, simulating being taken out of action. Good hit, Rodriguez confirmed. Target down. The exercise continued for another 20 minutes, with Sarah and Rodriguez working together to eliminate threats and protect the simulated hostages. By the time it concluded, they had successfully completed the mission with no simulated casualties among the friendly forces. As they packed up their equipment, Rodriguez seemed pleased with Sarah's performance. Outstanding work, he said. You've come a long way from that first day on the range. Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The training had been grueling, but she had proven to herself and to the team that she belonged in this environment. 2 weeks later, Sarah received official notification that she had been accepted as a contract asset for special operations support. The paperwork was extensive, involving security clearances and legal agreements, but Rodriguez helped guide her through the process. Welcome to the team, he said as they finished the final administrative tasks. I hope you're ready for some real-world application of those skills we've been developing. Sarah's first operational deployment came sooner than expected. 3 months after completing her training, she found herself on a military transport aircraft flying toward an undisclosed location in Eastern Europe. The mission briefing had been minimal, intelligence support for a joint operation with Allied forces, but Sarah understood that the details would be provided on a need-to-know basis. The team deploying for this mission was small. Rodriguez, 2 other SEAL operators she had trained with, and herself. The aircraft was configured for stealth insertion, and Sarah could feel the tension that preceded real operations. During the flight, Rodriguez provided additional details about their mission. We're supporting a multinational operation to neutralize a weapons trafficking network. Intelligence indicates that the targets have been supplying advanced weapons to terrorist organizations. Sarah listened carefully as Rodriguez outlined the operational plan. Their role would be to provide precision overwatch for a coordinated raid on a compound where the trafficking leaders were believed to be meeting. The challenge, Rodriguez continued, is that the compound is located in an urban area with significant civilian population nearby. Precision is absolutely critical. Any missed shots could result in civilian casualties. The gravity of the situation was not lost on Sarah. This was no longer a training exercise with electronic sensors and role players. The decisions she made and the shots she took would have real consequences. The insertion went smoothly, with the team establishing an overwatch position on a rooftop approximately 500 meters from the target compound. Sarah set up her rifle and began scanning the area through her scope, familiarizing herself with the terrain and identifying potential targets. The compound was a converted apartment building with multiple floors and numerous windows. Intelligence reports suggested that the trafficking leaders were meeting on the 3rd floor, but the exact room was unknown. Control, this is Lima team, Rodriguez reported. In position and conducting surveillance. As the hours passed, Sarah observed the normal rhythms of urban life continuing around the compound. People walked on the streets, children played in nearby courtyards, and the ordinary business of daily life proceeded without any indication of the significant operation unfolding. Shortly before dawn, things began to change. Sarah spotted movement in the compound that didn't match the residential patterns she had been observing. "I've got multiple individuals entering the building," she reported quietly. "Appears to be the meeting we've been waiting for." Rodriguez confirmed the observation through his own scope. "Control, targets are moving into position. Request permission to proceed to next phase." The response came quickly. "Lima team, you are authorized to commence surveillance phase 2. Maintain overwatch and report target identification." For the next 2 hours, Sarah and Rodriguez tracked movement within the building, identifying key figures and mapping their positions. The intelligence was proving accurate. This appeared to be a significant gathering of the trafficking network's leadership. At 0630 hours, the assault phase began. Sarah could hear the distant sound of helicopters approaching as other elements of the joint operation moved into position. Through her scope, she saw the first signs of activity in the compound as the occupants became aware of the approaching forces. "Multiple hostiles moving to defensive positions," Rodriguez reported. "Lima 2, do you have eyes on the 3rd floor?" Sarah adjusted her position and found several figures moving near the windows on the target floor. "Affirmative. I count 4 individuals, 2 appear to be armed." The situation developed rapidly. As the assault teams approached the building, armed individuals appeared at several windows and began firing at the approaching forces. Sarah could see the muzzle flashes and knew that the SEAL and allied operators were taking effective fire. "Lima team, this is Control. Assault teams are taking fire from multiple positions. You are cleared to engage targets of opportunity." Rodriguez immediately began engaging targets on the 2nd floor, his shots precise and effective. Sarah focused on the 3rd floor, where she had identified the primary threats to the assault teams. Through her scope, she could see a hostile with an automatic weapon positioned at a corner window, firing down at the approaching operators. The angle was challenging, and civilian buildings were visible in the background beyond the target. Sarah controlled her breathing and made the mental calculations necessary for the shot. The distance was within her capability, but the precision required was extraordinary. A miss could result in civilian casualties in the buildings beyond. She fired and saw the hostile immediately cease firing and move away from the window. Hit confirmed. The engagement continued for several more minutes, with Sarah and Rodriguez providing crucial overwatch support that allowed the assault teams to advance safely into the building. By the time the compound was secured, they had eliminated 6 hostile targets without a single civilian casualty. But the most critical moment came near the end of the operation. As the assault teams were clearing the final rooms, Rodriguez spotted movement on a rooftop 200 meters away from their position. "Hostile sniper!" Rodriguez called out urgently. "He's got a shot on the exfil route." Sarah swung her scope toward the indicated position and immediately saw the threat. A man with a rifle was setting up in a position that would allow him to fire on the assault teams as they exited the building with their prisoners. Rodriguez began moving to get a better angle on the target, but Sarah could see that the hostile was nearly in position to fire. There wasn't time for Rodriguez to reposition. In that moment, Rodriguez made a decision that demonstrated the trust he had developed in Sarah's abilities over their months of training together. Without hesitation, he handed her his rifle, a weapon optimized for the longer range required for this shot, and moved aside. "Take him," Rodriguez said simply. Sarah accepted the rifle, quickly familiarizing herself with the different scope settings and trigger characteristics. She had only seconds before the hostile would be in position to fire on the assault teams. The shot required everything Sarah had learned during her time with the team. The distance was over 600 meters, the wind conditions were tricky, and the target was partially concealed behind rooftop equipment. Most critically, There was no time for multiple range calculations or extended preparation. Sarah found the target in her scope, made rapid calculations based on the environmental conditions, and fired. The hostile immediately dropped his weapon and fell backward, eliminated before he could threaten the assault teams. "Outstanding shot," Rodriguez said, taking back his rifle. "That saved lives." The operation concluded successfully, with the trafficking leaders captured and a significant weapons cache seized. More importantly, from Sarah's perspective, the mission had been completed without any civilian casualties or friendly losses. During the debrief, the operation commander specifically commended Sarah's performance. The precision marksmanship provided by the Overwatch team was critical to mission success, he noted. Several potential civilian casualties were prevented by the accuracy of the support fire. Rodriguez was more direct in his assessment. "You've proven that our confidence in you was well placed," he told Sarah privately. "That last shot was as good as anything I've seen from operators with years more experience." As they prepared to return to the United States, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning when she had been setting up targets on the range at Fort Bragg. The skills she had developed as a competitive shooter had evolved into capabilities that could save lives and support critical national security missions. The flight home gave Sarah time to process the significance of what she had accomplished. She had successfully transitioned from civilian marksman to special operations support, proving that exceptional skill and proper training could bridge the gap between competitive shooting and tactical operations. More importantly, she had found a way to use her abilities in service of something greater than personal achievement. The precision that had once earned her trophies was now being used to protect lives and support missions that made a real difference in the world. When they landed back in Virginia, Rodriguez had one final observation. "You know, when I first saw you setting up those targets 6 months ago, I suspected you had the potential for this kind of work. But I have to admit, you've exceeded even my expectations." Sarah smiled, thinking about the moment when Rodriguez had handed her his rifle and stepped aside. It had been the ultimate demonstration of trust and confidence from a professional she had come to respect deeply. "Thank you for giving me the opportunity," she replied. "I never imagined that setting up targets on a training range would lead to something like this." Rodriguez grinned. "In our business, you never know where you'll find the capabilities you need. Sometimes the best operators come from the most unexpected places." As they walked away from the aircraft, Sarah knew that her decision to accept Rodriguez's offer had been the right one. She had found a way to use her skills that provided both personal fulfillment and meaningful contribution to important missions. The targets she set up now were very different from those she had positioned on the range that morning 6 months ago, but the precision required remained the same. And sometimes, that precision made all the difference between mission success and failure, between protecting lives and losing them. Sarah had found her place among the elite operators of SEAL Team 6, proving that exceptional skill, properly applied, could open doors she had never imagined. The journey from competitive shooter to tactical operator had been challenging, but it had led her to exactly where she belonged.